Tonight we're in Croydon, and welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home, here in our audience, an audience that will be putting questions as yet unknown to our panel. And our panel tonight, Labour's former Home Secretary Alan Johnson, the Liberal Democrat Business Minister Jo Swinson, the Conservative Chairman of the Select Committee on Public Administration, Bernard Jenkin, Christine Blower, General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers, and the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens, and we're grateful to him for coming in at short notice to replace the Daily Mail Deputy Editor, who is indisposed. And remember, as ever, you can join in this debate from home by text or Twitter. Hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981. Push the red button if you want to see what others are saying. Let's have our first question tonight, which comes from Viral Parikh, please.
Is the NUT strike action justifiable, as it will disrupt parents' lives, hold back children's education, and damage the reputation of the profession?
The NUT strike, which is planned for this day next week, is it justifiable for those reasons? Bernard Jenkin.
This is really about a dispute about pensions, and there have been plenty of public sector employees who've had the pensions changed because the pensions were very generous compared to what you can now get in the private sector. The police can't go on strike, the armed forces can't go on strike. I don't think it's right that teachers go on strike. What about the inconvenience it causes to others, not just disrupting the children's education, but to the parents who have their working lives disrupted and possibly affecting their incomes? No, it is not right. And it is an extraordinary thing. There are some teaching professions, some teaching associations who don't agree with strikes. They're not going on strike. It's only the NUT that is organising a strike. And I think it's unfortunate that a profession as important as teaching is infected with this kind of old-fashioned 1960s adversarial labour trade union approach to resolving disputes.
We'll go straight to the member of the audience there, you, sir.
Do you not think that teachers have a point when pay has been cut in real terms over the last 4 years? I'm a secondary school teacher in South London. I'd be quite happy to have my pay increases index linked to MPs' pay increases, who I gather are getting 11% next year.
No, we're not.
Are you going on strike? Are you going on strike on Thursday?
I beg your pardon?
Are you going on strike on Thursday?
I'm not. I'm not a member of the NUT, but I would do if my union sanctioned it.
But your union's against it?
My union hasn't balloted its members yet, the Association of Teachers and Lecturers.
Christine Blower, you're a big recruiting sergeant for him.
Yes, if you'd like to join. Now, well, the fact is that the strike action is not the only thing that the National Union of Teachers is doing. We have, for a good number of months, been running a Stand Up for Education campaign. Members have been out on Saturdays and over the weekend in town centres and city centres all over the country, engaging with parents and governors and young people themselves to explain why it is that we think that very many elements of government policy on education are wrong. Also on June the 10th, teachers covered for each other, and in some cases the head teachers allowed them to come to London and lobby MPs. We lobbied 156. That's about a quarter of all the MPs in the House. Bernard was actually also lobbied by 2 NUT members. So it's not the only thing that we're doing. We're also organising, plagiarising this, question times up and down the country, inviting prospective parliamentary candidates to come and talk.
But you are
about
going on strike. That's what the question's
yes,
about. I mean, you could do lots of nice things, which you can quote, but you're going on strike, which is what the questioner says, affects parents and children.
But I do want people to know that it's not the only thing that we're doing. Now, the fact is that, yes, next week we have called strike action, and you may or may not know that we will be the only teachers' union on strike, but we will be on strike with Unison, the GMB, Unite, PCS and the FBU. So this is quite broad across the public sector. And it isn't, as Bernard says, only about pensions. It's actually also about pay, but it's significantly about workload. Now, Michael Wilshaw says that, at the end of the 5th year of teaching, only 2 out of every 5 teachers who starts in the profession is still there. And that's at least in part because at the moment teachers are working 60-hour weeks. And the thing is, they're not spending that time writing exciting lesson plans and doing all the things that they want to do. It's very largely to do with the dead hand of an accountability regime. So our dispute with government is not just about pay, not just about pensions, it's also about that. And the fact is that actually we're heading towards the place where we will not be able to recruit enough teachers unless we get the pay right, but also, critically, we get the conditions right. So it is across the board for all of those things.
Well, the right to strike is an incredibly valuable part of any free society, and I'm very much in favour of it being maintained. But those who decide when to wield it have to be very careful when they do so. And it simply isn't the case that you can just do it when you feel like it or to pursue a political campaign. It must only be done. It is really almost a nuclear option. It is a thing that you actually do only when you really have no alternative. And I honestly don't believe that you have no alternative. The other thing I might point out to Christine Blower is this. The main beneficiary of your strike will be Michael Gove. A man who I believe is a much overrated Education Secretary, but who will make a great deal of the fact that you are opposing him, and will be delighted by the fact that you're publicly opposing him, and will be able to point to the huge disruption to parents. And this is the other point. Anybody working in the public sector, when they go on strike, they don't strike against the government, they strike against the public. And I don't think there's any more futile act that a public sector union could undertake.
Okay. You left there, yes.
I think I agree with your point. I think if anyone should have a voice, it is teachers. But surely, if you're having an issue with the government, that should not come to the detriment of pupils. Because we are trying as hard as you do. We want you to succeed. We want you to do well. But ultimately, if you are not there, we cannot help you and you cannot help us. Surely there must be another way, over strike action, that you can make yourself more improved, but not at the cost of the pupils.
Okay. I'll come back to you. Jo Swinson.
Well, I have to say, I think that young woman there put it incredibly eloquently. You know, Christine is right that trade unions do a huge amount of good in our society, and I think when we focus on the strike ballots, we actually are focusing on the one bit of what trade unions do that is actually quite a small part of what they do, because they generally play a very important role in workplaces, in resolving disputes, in training and so on. And actually I think the other things that trade unions do are more effective for achieving the goals. It's been an incredibly difficult 4 years. You know, the economic crisis has affected everybody, and I absolutely understand that your members, Christine, the gentleman in the audience and so on, people have been really struggling with very difficult pay in times of austerity. And, you know, we've been trying to do what we can as the government to make things a bit better, cutting taxes for people on low earnings and so on. But there's no getting away from the fact that it is incredibly difficult. But that is the case for people in the public sector, it's the case for people in the private sector as well. And as that young woman said, there is ultimately a very important job still to be done in educating the next generation. So I think it's incredibly regrettable that this is going to be happening. I hope it is just one day and will be able to be minimised in terms of the disruption to pupils and parents of younger pupils. And I hope that the NUT can actually get back around the table and have the discussions constructively with government to try to find resolutions to these issues.
Okay. The man up there with the beard, you sir, and the T-shirt on, yes.
I just think it's really important to note that no teacher actually wants to go on strike. They all value their work. But when Michael Gove repeatedly disvalues or doesn't credit professional opinion and professional advice, what else do you expect the teachers to do to have their voices heard?
All right, let me just come to Patrick Jenkins actually for point against Troyes, and I'll come to you, Alan.
Well, I thought it was about pensions and pay, but actually it's sounding a more and more political strike as I hear more and more being talked about. And in fact, the Stand Up for Education campaign, I mean, I looked at the leaflets, there was very little about improving literacy and numeracy in that campaign. That's not the style projected by the National Union of Teachers. I think trade unions are very important. I think it's very important that trade unions should represent the interests of their members. But this strike is not right.
But what about the Michael Gove point? Just make your point again. So you say that it's the only way of getting it go, is what you're saying.
He has repeatedly ignored all the professional advice about how to handle teaching in this country, and yet...
But I think you'll find that that's been said about virtually every education secretary for about 20 years.
No more. Michael Gove so much compared to anyone else.
I think they said it about Labour education secretaries.
All right. Alan Johnson.
Well, I'd like to
you had this job at one point.
Where Peter started, because the question was, is it ever right to go on strike? And it's a part of it's an important part of a mature democracy.
It wasn't. The question was, is this strike justified in view of the disruption it causes?
Sorry, I misheard you. But look, it's no good everyone saying the right to strike is absolutely important. It's a fundamental part of a healthy, mature democracy. And every time someone's going on strike, you condemn it. So in terms of this particular dispute, the lady there is absolutely right. A union no longer takes strike action, if it ever did, without considering the pros and cons. For a start, it has to be balloted industrial action, so you have to prove that you've got your members' support. And in terms of what's happening at the moment to people's pay and conditions, there's a good argument for a stronger trade union movement in this country rather than a weaker one. And there's also a good argument about how restrained trade unions have actually been in this country. If you look at other countries that have been going through the kind of austerity we've been, there's been a great deal of restraint. I understand this industrial action, and two principal reasons. Health workers are coming.
Yes.
Health workers
you're in
are coming.
Of the strike?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay. The sky didn't fall in. You know, people. The world didn't end. I think a union that balances their responsibility towards parents as well, and that's always because you can turn public opinion against you. But when you look at the fact that in the health service, the recommendation of the pay review body, which has never ever been rejected before, was rejected by Jeremy Hunt, and he said that health workers couldn't get a 1% pay increase if they were on the incremental scales. If you look at teaching and you see what's happening with performance-related pay introduced into schools, which is affecting your children because the bureaucracy that goes with it. I guarantee that in 5-10 years' time we won't hear any more about performance-based pay. It's a phase that I hope they're going through and will come out the other end. These are big issues for people. They're taking one day's industrial action to draw attention to it. And given all the frustrations they faced, I think that's absolutely defensible. Right.
Christine, just before we leave this, Alan Johnson mentioned that you have to get your members on side. How many of the 300,000 odd teachers voted for this strike action?
We have two ballots, about 43% in one and somewhat less than that in the other.
You don't know the actual numbers?
I didn't bring them, so
well, 43% of the 300,000. So under half voted for strike action, and then fewer in the second ballot.
Yeah.
So not very popular with the teachers then?
Well, actually, it's very popular because more of them take the action, and the fact is that what you have to do is make sure that you have a legitimate ballot, but actually more people take the action than vote. Just the same as more people are happy to go and see their MPs than ever vote for them. So, we have a legitimate ballot, and we've complied with everything that law requires us to comply with. And, so the fact is that people are following the strike call, yes. But let me just say that on the performance-related pay point, Alan is exactly right, and what's very interesting is that Dominic Cummings, previous advisor to Michael Gove, is saying that performance-related pay is completely wrong. And Catherine Birbal Singh, which is a name that some of you might know, who was, chosen, who was someone who Michael Gove chose to come and speak at the Conservative Party conference about free schools and so on, she is saying performance-related pay absolutely wrong. And one issue of this dispute is the fact that we believe that this is the wrong pay system to have in schools because it links teachers' pay much too closely and mechanistically to student outcomes.
Bernard Jenkins, you're nodding your head in agreement.
Yes,
you agree with her?
I'm very sceptical. I mean, we look at the whole public sector works on my committee and the way the public sector is rewarded. And most people work in the civil service or vocation like teaching because they believe in what they're doing. And the reward they really want is they want to work in a trusting environment. They want to be valued, they want to be supported, and then they want to work in an environment where, when things go wrong, they learn together with their bosses and their subordinates about what has gone wrong. And actually, to have this transactional relationship in such a vocation is misunderstanding the nature of the vocation. And I think it's rather a fashion that everybody should be on performance-related pay. But people do not live in those transactional relationships happily. It doesn't make people happy.
I'll take a couple more points, then we're gone. The woman up there on the right, and then I'll come to you.
There's a stranglehold going on in the public sector at the moment, and you have to be in the public sector to understand it. And I liked everything Vernon Jenkins was saying, but none of that is how it feels on the receiving end in the public sector, where jobs are being cut. I appreciate austerity. It's hard everywhere, but we are seeing the public sector being taken apart, dismembered, piece by piece. It's being in education, in health.
One thing I'd say very briefly, in response to that lady, is it doesn't feel like that in the poorly led schools and the poorly led educational
I'm not
authorities.
in schools. I'm
well,
just talking about
I promise
the
you,
public sector.
I think in the well-led schools it feels much better, and we need to think about how we want people to feel when they're working in public sector organisations.
What are you, in fact?
I'm a local council employee.
Peter Hitchens.
Could I just say, I was an industrial reporter during the great years of incessant strikes in this country, and I saw many, many people using the nuclear option, and almost invariably they destroyed the industries they claimed they were saving. And it does not actually do any good. It is usually disastrous for the industry, and indeed Alan Johnson's industry, the post office, was almost permanently ruined by strike action, in my view, and has never recovered from the strike action.
Peter's going back to the days when he was an industrial correspondent for the Socialist Worker.
No.
And what happened? Every time we had a strike, we had Socialist Worker outside saying, spread the strike, don't resolve it, spread it. My understanding, Peter's right about one thing, things have changed dramatically since the 70s, and there's things that I think we did in the 70s that when I was in my tank top and flares, I said in the trade union movement we should have done. So, you know, there's not a consensus about these issues, but certainly now, when people are very closely regulated in this country, when unions are probably more regulated than anywhere else in the world, to get to the stage where you're taking strike action is very different to the kind of walkout days that we remember, Peter, from the 70s.
All right, let's move on to another question. This is from Diane Squires, please. Diane Squires.
Is David Cameron a hero for standing up to Europe?
Is David Cameron a hero for standing up to Europe? There were some answers there. Jean-Claude Juncker, of course, only 2 people voted against him. Alan Johnson, you start off on this one. Is he a hero?
Poor David. No, someone ought to buy him a book on the art of negotiation. I mean, the poor man, every time an MP, Tory MP, is under threat of deselection, David writes to the local party and they get deselected. Every time he supports a minister like Maria Miller, you know she's going to be gone within a matter of days. He was probably the only man who could unite European Union in favour of Juncker. There were people, he needed roughly 4 European Union countries with the right number of votes to block it. And his approach was totally wrong. And if people think he's a hero for that, they'd have thought he was a hero back in December 2011 when he vetoed that directive and walked out. It went through. It went through. The veto meant absolutely nothing. Now, I'm concerned about this because I'm pro-Europe. And I tell you someone else who's pro-Europe as well, David Cameron. If you read Cameron's speech, his Bloomberg speech, where at the end he put in a bit to please people like Bernard and his backbenchers, he made a very powerful case for Europe, one of the best arguments I've ever seen. The bit at the end wasn't about what's right for this country, it was about what's right for the Conservative Party, and that's the truth of where we're going in terms of his policy on a referendum.
Peter Hitchens.
I'm amazed that this complete fake has achieved such success, that somebody can go... somebody who, as Alan rightly says, loves the European Union, the words European Union run through him as they run through a stick of rock. A man who a couple of years ago made a speech saying the European Union should be extended to the Ural Mountains. This person, who is actually probably one of the most pro-EU politicians in the country, has managed to pose successfully to anybody in this country as an opponent of Brussels is a tribute either to the amazing powers of spin of the Conservative Party or the extraordinary gullibility of members of the population. I just can't understand how anyone can swallow it. He got into this position by accident. He was wrongly briefed by somebody who told him that he could have an easy victory against Juncker because they thought that Angela Merkel was against it. When it turned out she wasn't, he then decided to do a huge reverse ferret. And instead of being the great victor who'd got rid of Jean-Claude Juncker, he would be the lone opponent of Jean-Claude Juncker, along with the Hungarians. And this is all completely stage-managed. It has no content at all. David Cameron, if it ever came to a referendum, one of the many post-dated cheques that he's signed, which he almost certainly won't ever have to honour, if it ever came to a referendum on the European Union, would without doubt urge everybody to vote to stay in it. He has no intention of taking this country out of the European Union. His whole stand against the European Union is phony. People the supposed Eurosceptics of the Conservative Party. What does it mean, Eurosceptic? What is there to doubt? The European Union exists. Either you're in favour of leaving it or you're in favour of staying in it. David Cameron's in favour of staying in it. I don't know what Mr Jenkins in favour of, because at the moment he's able to avoid the question thanks to his performance. But the Conservative Party in general is and always has been the most pro-Brussels party in the country. And for it to pretend to be otherwise is an act of extraordinary dishonesty, and for anyone to believe it is an act of extraordinary gullibility.
All right, thank you. There are many hands up, but I better let Bernard Jenkins just comment on that. Is your Prime Minister a hero for the way that he stood up to...
Well, just to answer Peter's question to start with, I mean, if there was a vote tomorrow about whether we should stay in this increasingly centralised, bureaucratic, failing mess that is the European Union, against which the Labour Party gave away the veto on this question of whether we should have been able to veto the President of the Commission. Unfortunately, the Labour Party gave that veto away.
Carry on with the if.
But I would vote to leave.
Who took us into the European
I would vote to leave.
By the way.
But what I hope we can do is renegotiate a different relationship. But if that's not possible, I will vote to leave. And that's why... But you see, I want you to have the choice. David Cameron wants you to have the choice.
Is David Cameron a hero?
The Labour Party doesn't want you to have the choice.
Is David Cameron a hero?
David Cameron is a hero for doing this one thing, which is going into opposition in the European Union, where you have majority votes, not pretending to agree when he doesn't agree, openly saying, I do not agree. And what we know is all over Europe there were heads of state whispering behind their hands, actually we rather agree with you, but we're rather worried about the Germans. The problem is that Germany is now the most powerful country in Europe, and even Chancellor Merkel would quite like to have not had this person, but she was frog-marched by her party. Her backbenchers told her that they wanted Herr Juncker, and that's the end of it.
So she's no hero, but Cameron is a hero?
I think Cameron is a hero for pointing out that a spade is a spade, and this is not the one we wanted, so we're not voting for him.
What?
My arm's aching again.
Just wait a second, I'll come to you. You said in the front row here.
I wouldn't call David Cameron a hero, but it was nice to see him actually stand up for British interests. I mean, after the European election results, it is clear that the British people want a referendum on a membership of the European Union. Right. And whether he actually sticks to it or not is probably a different story. I can't agree with him. He's slightly a phony on this because he's very pro-European. He tries to hide it. But I think...
Well, I tell you, if he doesn't do it, he really will have some problems with his backbenchers.
Well, if he doesn't do it, he's got backbenchers like you and UKIP to kick him off the backside.
He will deliver it. And this week we've introduced another bill to make it law that there will be a referendum by 2017.
No doubt the Liberal Democrats and Labour are going to block that bill in the laws in Parliament.
Well, I hope they're not going to, because the signs are that they're going to let it through, and then we can put it through the House of Lords because it's the second
Johnson,
time.
Even the Green Party are offering a referendum, so you might as well offer one as well. Your party should.
Is that how politics work? So everyone else wants it, so we...
I'm just saying, a referendum is in people's interest.
Yeah.
My generation's never had a say. I don't know whether I'd stay in or leave, but I'd like to have a say of, do I stay in this European superstate or do I leave? And I don't really know. I'd like to stay, but the way things are going now with all this increasing power to Brussels, it's a bit alienating for someone like me. So I may leave, I may stay, I'm not too sure.
Doesn't it make you even a tiny bit suspicious that this referendum is being offered more than 2 years hence, after the person who's offering it will almost certainly not be in office?
It does.
Not even the tiniest bit suspicious.
I feel as though it's because...
Okay. If he wants to hold a referendum, he can hold it now.
It's because of Eurosceptic backbenchers.
He doesn't want to hold the referendum, that's why he
and it's
doesn't
because of
hold it
UKIP,
now.
that's why he's offering it.
All right. I'll come to you, and then I come up to the top of the man who says he's waving.
Yeah, I'm just
not
wondering.
drowning.
I'm
Yes.
just wondering whether the Scots feel the same about Westminster.
Well, maybe they do.
Whether the Scots
Feel the same about Westminster.
But they're actually having a referendum, you see.
Yeah, but
they are.
Theirs is actually happening.
But it's a good question.
by David Cameron.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, because I would say that I hope the Scots are going to vote no if in 2 years' time, on this concocted referendum on a time scale that's to do with the Tory party, not national interest, if they did vote to leave, if we voted to leave the European Union, the Scots would demand another referendum, and I bet they would leave the UK. And that's a very real
I think quite the reverse. Quite the reverse. And in fact, the Scots just elected a UKIP MEP suggesting the Scots are just as Eurosceptic as the rest of the United Kingdom.
More Tories. There are more headers in Edinburgh Zoo than there are Tory MPs in Scotland.
Men on the panel, just give way to the women for a moment. Christine Blower, you cited Unite, you're going on strike with them, you cited them with approval. They've asked for Labour to have a referendum on the EU. McCluskey wants it. Would you join him in going for a referendum?
It's not the policy of the NUT to have a referendum. We don't have policy in this area.
Your policy?
But in terms
Your
of
policy? As a politician yourself?
Well, I'm in a very interesting position, which is that when we very first went in, I voted no. But I now think that it's absolutely right for Britain to be in Europe, and if there were a referendum, I would actually personally vote to stay in. But that isn't the policy of the National Union of Teachers. We don't have policy in that area.
No, but you've said personally you would vote to stay in. Would you like to see Labour offer that choice? You're speaking personally,
is it not the case that what the Labour Party has said is that if there were very significant changes to treaties, that there would be a referendum? And it seems to me that that is a reasonable position. That if there is a significant change in terms of the relationship, the way Europe works, that might be a point at which you make a decision. I happen to think the idea of offering a referendum in, beyond the next election is a bit phoney, and I think it's destabilising and unsettling.
But Mr. McCluskey says
so long ago.
Mr. McCluskey says that Ed Miliband's going to have a difficult job explaining why he's not joining other parties in offering the British people a vote on something that's clearly a growing source of public concern.
£12 million.
But that's
so they should do it.
They should agree.
He
doesn't dictate policy.
And that is the policy of Unite, but it isn't the policy of my union.
Jo Swinson.
Well, I think the
Can
gentleman...
you remember the question?
Yeah, is he a hero?
Is David Cameron a hero, yes.
And
you're in the government with him. So
I am, but that doesn't mean that on every single thing that we will always agree. We're on a coalition government, and so I would say my answer to that question is no. I actually think that the sort of the stoking up of anti-European sentiment is not particularly conducive to our national interest, because whether it's on trade and jobs, we rely on our relationships with other European countries, whether it's on how we can tackle major threats like climate change and international crime. So I think that is an important relationship for the UK to have. And I hope that in a future referendum, and I think there will be a referendum, I hope that we will vote to stay in. I think that there are changes we should make to Europe. It's not a perfect set of institutions. We should certainly reform it. But I think then it comes down to a question of timing. Rather than picking a date out of the air at random of saying, well, it should be 2017, what we've legislated for is picking up exactly on the point the gentleman in the middle said. He said he felt uncomfortable about more powers going to the European Union. And so when there is a treaty change, and of course it's quite feasible that with all of the changes in the Eurozone as they work themselves out after the financial crisis that we've faced, that there may well be some treaty change. And at that point, a referendum would kick in as per the legislation that we've passed.
Hang on, what changed your mind on all this? Because you used to say the exact opposite. It's no good having a vote on the Lisbon Treaty, you say. What we need is a vote on the principle of whether to be in or out. Well, why have you changed your mind? You're now saying if there's treaty change, it's worth it. Why don't you ask Clegg, who's against it, to say, look, you'll do well with the British public.
We're saying if there's treaty change, we should have a vote, but that the only sensible question to have would be on whether or not we should be in or out of the European Union. And that's when we should do so.
But it's completely dishonest, this, because the European Union treaties take power from our own country every day. Every court judgment, every new directive is taking power from our country. And if we want that to stop, we need to change the treaties. If we won't change the treaties, well, then you're going to have to accept that the City of London becomes regulated by the European Union, that we have open borders with the rest of the European Union, we can't control our immigration with the rest of the European Union. You're going to have to accept that all these things keep happening to us and there's nothing we can do about it.
Let's the man at the very back there.
Oh, thank you, David. I'll put my arm down, as you said now. Now, this situation with regard to treaty changes sounds like Batman and the Riddler. You know, David Cameron's offering he'll give the British public a referendum if he wins the general election. And then you've got the other so-called three main parties all, you know, up against this situation with regards to us having a referendum. Why cannot the British people be allowed to put the great back into Great Britain and give us a referendum so we can make up our own mind? We're the experts out here. We know what's going down. Let's put the great back into Great Britain.
All right, we're the experts. You, sir, what do you think? Man with spectacles here on the right.
I'm coming back to the fundamental point about David Cameron. He missed a chance where he could have nominated an alternative to Juncker, which was by staying in the EPP and getting it all sorted out there. It wouldn't need to be a hero.
And the woman there, I'll come to you, sir, in a moment. The woman there in the second in, yes, you. Yes, you.
I think a yes-no referendum is too simplistic for such a complex issue. For the public to decide, say no or yes, is too simplistic. You need reform, and perhaps what a better solution would be, yes, we want to stay in with no reform. Yes, we want to stay in, but we want reform in the EU, or no, we want to come out completely. Yes or no is too, like, there's too much dichotomy between the options.
Too brutal.
Yes, exactly.
But if there was a renegotiation offered and undertaken, and a Prime Minister, say Cameron, were you in a position to do it, would you then think it was right to say yes or no? If you've had a renegotiation of the terms of Britain's membership?
Yes, I think if there was a change in the way the EU was run, I think then you would be in a position to be able to say yes or no.
This is a myth. The whole idea of renegotiation is a complete fantasy, just as the idea there was any alternative to Jean-Claude Juncker. If it hadn't been Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU keeps cupboards full of men in grey suits, exactly like him, dozens of them, and there would have been another one available. To complain that a European Union official is a federalist is like complaining that a bicycle has handlebars. That's what they are. That's what they're like. There is no renegotiation. The European Union has been, since it began, and it has in its initial treaty, the Treaty of Rome, a clause calling for ever closer union, which means the abolition of our national power. Now, Mr. Jenkin here poses as a great opponent of the European Union. I'm going to ask him if he's so opposed to it, and all the other members of Parliament here, what they're doing about the fact that the European arrest warrant, which we have actually uniquely got the chance to get out of, an outrageous interference with our independence, which allows a magistrate somewhere in Europe to issue a warrant against somebody in this country, which we then have to execute. We could, if we wished to, now opt out of that. By a unique anomaly of the European Union, we can opt out of it. They're not going to opt out of it given the opportunity. Why is that? Why are you not going to opt out of it?
I am completely at one with you. I'm going to vote against this. I think it's absolutely mad. We stood on a platform of the European elections saying we were going to take back power over justice and home affairs, and it's completely bonkers for us to contemplate.
And what are the Tory whips going to do about it?
It also enables us to catch criminals and when they've fled to other countries in Europe.
There are 170 countries outside the European Union that have extradition agreements with European countries.
All right,
you don't have to be in the European Union to get an extradition warrant.
It's a lot quicker doing it through the European arrest warrant.
Without the European arrest warrant, we would have never got the London bombers back.
Exactly.
And Cameron picked on this Juncker issue. Cameron picked the wrong fight. One of the reforms we're trying to get out of Europe is making it more democratic. And the whole point was that Juncker was a democratic choice of the European Parliament that we'd only just elected. And he was the... Would you like, the next time there's a general election here, that the leader of the largest party wasn't somehow the Prime Minister or the leader of the country? Because that's what the logic of not having Juncker was. He was the leading candidate from the EPP that had just won that election.
No, they didn't win.
All right. On that puzzle, we'll go on to another question. Rosemary Hafiz, please. Rosemary Hafiz.
The Croydon MP, Richard Ottaway, has suggested that residents who can't afford a house in the area should move to Manchester. Do you agree?
Yes, this was Richard Ottaway's view. You should move to Manchester if you can't afford to live in Croydon. Jenkin, I think. Bernard Jenkin, what's your view?
Name, yes.
I know, I call you Patrick because I knew your father. Anyway, go on. What's your view of it?
I don't actually agree with my colleague. I know what he's saying, and I think it probably came out wrong, because what we need in London is, to deal with this housing bubble, is to have a lot more homes built. And we need imagination. We're going to have to have a lot of imagination to get it done. I have to say, I was in opposition during the 1990s and 2000s, and we got very, very green-minded about building on green fields and being against building on the countryside. And we were very against what Labour were trying to do, and now we're trying to do what they were trying to do. We were wrong. We've got to build more homes in the South East. But it comes down to this other point. We've got to make it that you can have a career in Manchester. You don't have to come down to London to have a glittering professional career. We've got to refocus the economic centre of gravity of our country. And I think what Lord Adonis has announced this week, very much along the same lines as what Lord Heseltine announced a couple of years ago, about refocusing resources, reallocating resources so they can be controlled and spent by local forces in different parts of the country. And maybe we can go further, make much more tax-raising power, much more autonomy for the city regions. We've got to try and balance out the fact that we've got this mega city here in London, a fantastic global hub. But it really mustn't sort of crowd out the rest of what's happening in the UK. So what was wrong with what he says? What we should be doing is getting people on trains up to Manchester. What's wrong with saying that? What people want is for people to live in the communities where they grew up. I mean, Alan grew up in Chelsea, on Notting Hill. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to afford to live there now. Or perhaps you do.
Have you got a policy? You know, have you got a policy? Have you got a policy to allow him back in?
Well, I think we need to. You know, there was a poll in the Standard.
What are you going to do? Kick the Russians out, not let anybody move into Kensington and Chelsea?
There was a poll.
Yes.
There was a poll in the Standard recently which showed that most Londoners now think London property prices are too high and should fall. And that just shows how much people are worried that their children and their grandchildren simply aren't going to be able to live in the communities where they were brought up.
I want to go back to Rosemary. You asked the question. Do you agree with what Richard Ottaway said?
No. No, not at all. I find that I lose staff because there's not enough affordable housing in the area, and my daughter has really struggled to get her foot on the housing ladder. We've had to help her out, and I think we do need more affordable housing, and we need it to support a cross range of the population, the high end, and it has to be affordable for people that are in local authority jobs, teaching positions, nursing staff. So no, I don't agree with him.
You don't agree. Okay. Christine Blower.
Well, I'm astonishingly large measure of agreement with what Bernard Jenkin says. I mean, the fact is that the Royal Institute of Architects this week brought out a report saying that we need to build 300,000 homes a year for the foreseeable future because we just haven't been building enough, and that we do have to think about whether every bit of the green belt is actually doing what it needs to do and where we do decide to build. But critically, we have to make sure that there are affordable houses for people who want to stay in the area where they grew up. For example, I live in Hammersmith and Fulham, where almost all the development over the past 8 years has been distinctly unaffordable for anyone who actually, you know, are the sons of daughters of working people who live in Hammersmith.
And how do you achieve it? How do you achieve it?
Right. Well, you obviously have a policy of building some social housing and some part ownership and all of those kinds of things. But it also is that you have to think about where else you can build. And the fact is that, according to the architects, there are bits of the green belt on which we could build because actually it's not good amenity green belt. So we have to use all the brownfield sites we've got, but also we have to make sure that there aren't, and I believe that there still are very large numbers of these, that there aren't large numbers of unoccupied houses in city centres, whether they're in London or whether they're in Manchester. And absolutely, I think that we shouldn't be focusing everything on London and the South East. I don't personally want to go and live in Manchester because I live in London and have lived in London for a long time. But I do want there to be sufficient housing in Manchester for those young people who grew up in Manchester to be able to move out from home and actually sustain themselves in their own home on the kinds of jobs that they can get.
Yeah, I mean, Ottaway's point was that it was much cheaper to live in Manchester and you should leave London if you can't afford to live here.
But the point is that there is no reason why people should have to leave London if actually they want
Jo
to live
Swinson.
in London.
Well, Manchester is a vibrant and wonderful city, but I don't think people should be forced to move to entirely other parts of the country.
They are in the BBC. The BBC forces them all to go and live in Salford.
I mean, I think it's common, certainly in the area where I represent, that people who are trying to get onto the housing ladder can't necessarily do so particularly easily, very close to the area where they grew up, and they might have to be sort of moving a little bit further away initially as they get onto the housing ladder. But I think 200 miles is a little bit extreme for that, and people do live in communities, and those family ties can be incredibly important.
But do you think the government's housing policy is right? Do you think the right number of houses are being built? And if not, why not?
Well, we need to build more houses. I don't think anybody would...
we are building more.
We are. We're building 450,000, since the general election, which is, a significant increase, more than double than the number that were being built in 2009.
Harold Macmillan, the Conservative Prime Minister, built 300, when he was Housing Minister, 300,000 houses a year, and that was when the population of the country was smaller and maybe in more space. Why couldn't you have done that?
We do need to ramp up and build many more.
But why haven't you?
Well, there's various things that have made it difficult, not least within construction, with the economic crisis that we've faced. We're looking at more garden cities to have, new places that can actually, on, good transport lines that can become new hubs and new communities that can be built. I think we need to get a lot more inventive with brownfield as well. I mean, it always strikes me, and I never cease to be surprised in London, in some of the little corners where it's in zone 1 or in zone 2, and yet you've got sort of derelict buildings that don't seem to be anything having done.
I don't want to stop you in full flow, but what do you do? Because you can say we haven't built houses as a government, but actually it's the developers who do the building. Yeah. What can you do to get developers to build on these brownfield sites, on these areas where they seem unwilling to do? Or are you saying that actually government should build houses, that councils should build more houses?
Councils also should. I mean, for example, one of the things which Nick Clegg set out very clearly in terms of our plans for the future is to say that we need to be making sure, once we've dealt with the deficit, that we're changing the way the fiscal rules are to make sure that we particularly have investment, and we borrow to invest in house building, because we do need many more homes. That's ultimately the only solution to this issue. I think one of the other issues in London is the number of properties that are being bought up by foreign investors and not even necessarily even lived in, but you've got sort of empty properties. Well, what we have done is, we've increased stamp duty in such circumstances to 15%, but, do we need to look at whether there's more things we need to do? We want to introduce a mansion tax on properties over £2 million, because, high-end property is very undertaxed as well.
Hit the people who live here?
There's a range of different things we need to do, but we also need to stop London being the centre of the universe as far as our kind of mindset is concerned. There are lots of different corners of this country that have a fantastic amount to offer. The creative industries in Manchester, financial services in places like Leeds or Edinburgh,
Hull.
and I used to work in Hull. Hull is wonderful too, and we need to get into a way of appreciating all of the UK.
Can we stop?
Right, this one in the front row.
I think there's a bit too much emphasis on houses and not enough emphasis on homes, because at the end of the day, my best friend, he had to leave his childhood home, he had to go do a squat well session up in Clapham, and now he can't go back there. At the end of the day, people need homes, and if you're going to build houses, you then actually need to build a hospital, you then need to build a school for people to go to, you need infrastructure, you need to build a community. There are so many empty houses sitting out there. Croydon do ghost tours of all the empty buildings, so you've got a councillor telling you to leave when you've actually got buildings that are sitting there as empty as Detroit, and it's really not acceptable.
What is a ghost tour?
It's like...
Exciting.
Yeah, well, you don't see any actual ghosts, just memories.
Well, they show properties that are no longer in use.
They go around derelict, empty buildings, and they say, look how good this architecture was back in the day, and we're going to grade 2 list it, but you're not allowed to move in.
OK. Peter, just hold on a second. Let me hear from one or two others. The man with the spectacles up there in the third row.
Yes, I'd just like to say, I don't think the MP was misquoted at all. I actually think this is a mindset of a number of the Westminster MPs that, you know, when they look at this, I actually think that the easiest thing is for people just to up sticks and go, because it's not in their interest to have those people around. And the trouble is, I don't think it will hit home until the nanny of that person doesn't turn up in the morning and the fire doesn't get put out because there's no fireman round the corner, and that the police don't turn up at his door when he needs stuff. Because I think that's the only time for some of these people the truth will hit home.
OK. Peter.
Yeah, and Mr. Ottaway seems to have done that thing which none of the politicians on the panel here tonight will do, the terrible thing that politicians are never supposed to do, and told the truth. It's what he really meant. It may be that as a result he may have to move out of Croydon, I don't know, that'll be up to you. But this whole subject is the reason why people like me, and I did it before, I'll do it again, have been banging on, as we've accused of been doing, about the European Union, because the reason for our housing crisis is quite simply this, that we have had, thanks to our open borders, imposed on us by the European Union, the greatest wave of mass immigration in our national history, begun under Labour, continued under the Coalition, and that's why there aren't enough houses. There's another reason for it. And I say this not because there's only much we... no, I'm not blaming... I'm absolutely not blaming the immigrants. The people who came here... The people who came here were perfectly reasonable to come here. They were encouraged to come here by governments. They came to better themselves. I don't blame them in the slightest. What I blame, if you'll let...
He had to move out of his house because immigrants moved in. He had to move out of his house because the council realised it could sell it for £2 million, and some rich people could move in. It's nothing to do with them at all. At the end of the day.
It's a wholly separate issue, but to say that I'm blaming immigrants...
It's not a separate issue, it's a housing issue.
No, to say that I'm blaming immigrants is a straightforward, big, fat lie. And it is a lie, and I reject it. It has nothing to do with the immigrants, it's to do with the politicians. They did it, they opened the borders, and they made it happen, and we're going to have to find some accommodation with it, but I do not think they should escape the blame. I think when we realise that our country, much of our country, is going to have to be concreted over because of this, we should always remember who made that happen. There's another aspect to this, which is that government after government, repeatedly failing to find any way of genuinely stimulating the economy, has gone over and over again into the creation of housing bubbles to create the illusion of prosperity. It's going on now. It's both dangerous for the economy and very, very bad for people who have to live in houses. For most of us, it doesn't matter what your house is worth. You can't sell it and go and live in a tent. What matters is whether you can afford it and whether your children can afford to buy a house in the future or indeed rent one, which is increasingly what they have to do. This policy, combined with the mass immigration, is disastrous for both of those things. Blame them for it a bit more, would you? Get rid of them and put somebody else in.
All right, Peter, thank you. And you say that. And then up to you at the very back. Yes, I take two more
think
points.
house affordability is a question which affects everybody, and it will affect more the next generation. I have a couple of suggestions. I think one is we need to either tax or have some government policy where we can force builders who are having a huge amount of land banks so that they can start building immediately rather than waiting for inflated house prices to get major profit. Second is, especially in London area, we need to look and get a government coherent policy for vacant houses. And third, I do agree, I think immigration is also one of the angles which we have to look into. You know, we can't start categorizing people into by giving them certain labels just because they are making this valid point. I think it's high time we all are honest about the situation.
Right. Alan Johnson.
Well, I heard Peter's arguments when I was a kid in Notting Hill, and when people were coming over from the West Indies to work in our NHS, to drive our buses, to work in the post office. And we heard the same things then. We had, I'm not associating you with this, Peter. We had
yes, you are. You are. It's a straightforward smear. I think you should pull back from it while you still can. It's a smear.
We had Mosley on the corner saying exactly the same thing. And it was always blame the immigrants. Now, on this issue in particular, the argument is ludicrous. The argument is ludicrous. There was a housing crisis. David just mentioned 300,000 houses a year under Macmillan, 250,000 before him when Nye Bevan was the housing minister. We've never got to grips with the housing problems we've got in this country. In London now, the cost of moving from a two-bedroom flat to a three-bedroom house, reported this week in the Evening Standard, is £135,000 pounds, 4 times the London average wage. Now, the point that Jo made was right about the need to build extra houses, and Bernard said it as well. But the time to have done it was over the last 4 years. It has never been cheaper. It has never been cheaper to construct houses than over the last 4 years. All these houses are going to have to be built eventually. We could have stimulated the economy. Instead of that, Osborne cut back on the capital spending budget. And so we're still talking about the same things that we should have been doing 3 or 4 years ago. I think the
woman in the very back there.
Well, I have to disagree about what Ottaway said about having to upstick families away from the area if they can't afford it. The point of it is that there are families out there that do have children but have other family members to help them look after them. How are they supposed to do that if they're moved out the area?
OK. And I take one more point from the person there, the woman in the back. Yes.
Well, surely the housing crisis is due to the widespread selling off of council property due to right to buy, which was one of the most divisive policies of the Tory government.
OK, Bernard Jenkins, you just want to answer that point?
Well, I mean, it's a policy that the Labour Party carried on with, and in fact the people living in those houses, whether they're owned by the council or somebody else, I mean, maybe we should have built more council houses, and we're now building more council houses. But actually, every suggestion that's been made, really, when I said we need some imagination, we're going to have to build really big new settlements, and Boris has got this brilliant idea to
Who's Boris?
Who is Boris? You're showing your age. Boris Johnson's got this brilliant idea of moving Heathrow Airport to the Thames Estuary, which would create a huge opportunity to create a new city on the site of Heathrow, build hundreds of thousands of homes and a high-tech city.
Are you in favour of this?
That is, yes, I very much am.
All right, fine.
And that is the kind of imagination we're going to need to tackle this problem. But I mean, I just say one thing. We politicians have allowed this extraordinary influx of population into this country. I mean,
all right, well, that point's been made, so I'm going to stop you there, and we'll go on to our final question, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. And this is from Andy Richardson, please.
A recent populist poll described our leading politicians as weird, arrogant and out of touch. Are they?
Be brief, Bernard, if you would, but you can answer that first.
Me?
Yes.
Is it weird? Well, I mean, given that, you know, about 0.01% of the population is involved in active politics, that does make us pretty weird, doesn't it, Alan? I think we do tend to live in something of a bubble in the Westminster Village. But, you know, every MP goes to their constituency at weekends and deals with everyone's very, very straightforward problems and very difficult problems. And no, that's not true.
All right, and ignores them. All right,
well, you can always get a round of applause by attacking politicians.
Yeah, but this was a poll.
Yeah,
this was a poll that was done of what people think. It's not a cheap round of applause. What people say, and you should answer what they say, not yourself.
I'm answering what they say.
Well, I do think that politicians who say things like people who go to food banks are doing it as a lifestyle choice are clearly out of touch with what's happening, and I do think, that there are many politicians, not all by any means, but many politicians who do get out of touch, notwithstanding the fact that they have to speak to their constituents when their constituents come in. And axiomatically almost, they're a bit weird, as you say, Bernard, because there are so few people doing it. But the serious point is that I think we absolutely have to have politicians who understand what life is like for working people who, frankly, there are plenty of working people having to claim benefits because they are just in such a poor state. And I really don't think that the vast majority of politicians understand that. I think that is a serious matter.
Alan Johnson, weird? Do you think yourself weird?
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Many people would say that. Look, this is really serious, and it's a big problem because there is this disconnect And it's true, Bernard says, you know, it's always been the case. There was never a stage where politicians were popular. If you look back in history, even Winston Churchill, after the Second World War, had someone stand against him, an independent, and get 10,000 votes in his own constituency. But it's got to a stage now, and that might be something to do with the expenses scandal and other things, where it's worrying. You can't just dismiss this as if, and say, as I would say, it's a noble profession and anyone's welcome to join it and stand for election. It's a great thing for us to have a democracy with people voting for the people who represent them. Go to many places in the world, not too far away actually, if you go across to Russia, you'll see communities that really would be desperately keen to have that system. But if we've got to the stage now where so many people feel this, and whether it's the institutions, whether it's the way MPs behave, whether it's the process, we've got to tackle it, because we can't just dismiss this. And I think whatever the solutions, and I can't come out with them tonight, whatever the solutions, we have to take it seriously, all parties across the House, because I've never known this disconnect be so bad.
All right, the man in spectacles there in the middle. No, hang on.
Do you think we've got a problem when the Prime Minister can guess the price of a loaf of bread and get it 50% wrong, and Boris can then guess the price of milk and also get it 50% wrong?
Jo Swinson, and be brief, because we really have overrun our time now.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, you know, being very actively involved in politics, whether you're an elected politician or indeed the fantastic people in all of our constituencies who go out there at the weekends and knock on doors and give up their evenings and so on, yeah, that's not the norm, and so perhaps that is a bit weird. But I also think that people often have a different view of politicians as a group than their own elected councillor in their community or their own member of parliament. So, I mean, I'll often have people that will be, you know, explaining their frustration to me when I'm out knocking on doors or in my constituency about politicians, and, you know, and I'll say something and they'll go, oh, I don't mean you. And so I think that there is sometimes this sort of disconnect between what people's actual experience can be, and it's not always the case, and I appreciate, given some of the comments tonight from the local member, then that might not be the right audience for that. But there is often, I think, people have sometimes an appreciation for their local councillors, their local members of parliament, that they've perhaps been helped by at their local constituency surgery, and they don't necessarily think that that's the same.
Peter Hitchens.
Some of them are all right, but most of them are pretty much like us, and that's one of the problems. But the other thing is that they cannot become politicians. Alan goes on about being elected. You don't get elected, you get selected by the parties. And you cannot get selected by the parties unless you accept various stupid, outdated, discredited ideas which still obsess our political class and which have been exploded in the eyes of almost all the rest of us, which they will not give up. And that is the real reason for the disconnect between them and us. They are still thinking in categories and ideas which were discredited many, many years ago, and you can't get into the magic circle unless you accept that. And until that changes, until these three parties are ejected from Westminster and replaced with ones which truly represent what we're worried about, that won't change. Precisely because of that, because your party would never select me, his party would never select me, your party would never select me. It's not. And it is up to... No, wait a minute, this is so... Do you not see how parliamentary elections work? You vote at elections for those put before you by the major parties. If anybody outside that stands, they haven't a hope. It's that point of selection, which is the point at which people... It is exactly the point at which people get into politics.
All right.
How did Caroline Lucas get elected in Brighton?
Well, how did she get elected? Because it's Brighton.
How did Dick Taverne get elected?
All right. Our hour is over. Next week's going to be the last question time until the autumn, and we're going to be in Inverness next week. And for a change, we're going to have no politicians on the panel. There's going to be a panel made up of musicians and businessmen and journalists. And we're going to be back on the 25th of September. That's after the Scottish independence vote. And we're going to have the programme from Kelso, which is close to the English border. And what we're looking for on the 25th of September is an audience made up in part from people from England, in part from people in Scotland, clearly to debate the result of that referendum, and of course whatever else is in the news. Now, if you want to come to either programme, Inverness next week or Kelso on September the 25th, go to our website, the address is there on the screen, or call us 0330 123 9988. As ever, if you're listening to this on 5 Live, the debate goes on Question Time Extra Time. But my job now just to thank our panel and all of you who came here to Croydon to take part. Until next Thursday, when we'll be in Scotland, good night.
Politics and honesty, the two aren't mutually exclusive. The whole truth on This Week, next.